Humans of the cardboard, get your cheeks ready. Today we're talking more about Rescue Ace. I went over the brand new cards in a reaction video a couple days ago. But the one thing I didn't get a chance to do in that video was go a little bit more in depth on the new cards because they got revealed with a bunch of other stuff. So today I want to talk about Rescue Ace more as a whole than just those two specific cards and whether they are good or not and where I think Rescue Ace actually lands with these new cards. They got a new card coming in like a week. That card's kind of cheeks, to be honest. But the two new cards they got revealed for the next core set are quite nice for them. Quite nice. To the point where, like, I think they might actually be interesting. And, you know, interesting in not necessarily the fact that I think they're going to be competitive. They're going to be, or at least meta. They're not going to be tier 1. I don't even think they're going to be tier 2. I do still think they have some weaknesses. But I do still think overall, this deck went from not even on the rogue radar to, I could see this deck getting some tops here and there because it does have some powerful plays. It does now have plays aside from resolving turbulence. And I think they're just in a much better spot. They're way better. So let's get into it. Starting off with the new cards. We need to go over these really quickly so we understand what we're talking about here and what's being added to the deck. The first one here is Preventer. He's the new monster. He's a level 8 fire machine. 28/28, really big boy. He can summon himself from the hand by banishing a Rescue Ace monster from your graveyard. Only one, so even easier to summon than Turbulence. If you control another Rescue Ace monster, quick effect, target an effect monster your opponent controls, flip it face down, so it's just a walking Book of Moon. And lastly, if this card is sent to the graveyard, generically, not from field, just sent, you can target one of your banished Rescue Ace monsters, except for a level 8, so just not another copy of himself. Special summon it. It's really good because he would presumably banish something just to get himself out in the first place, and then from there, if he does leave the field, whether you link him off or your opponent takes care of him, you do float back into another monster, which is very cool. So yeah, I like this card quite a bit. It's not enough on its own, and that's why I think this spell card does a huge help with that. This is Emergency. This is always a Rescue Ace card. It's a quick play spell. Special summon a Rescue Ace monster from your deck in defense position, then tribute a Rescue Ace monster from your hand or field. During the main phase, you can banish this card from your grave to target a Rescue Ace trap in your graveyard and set it. Very, very, very phenomenal card. It is an E-Telly with a little bit of a restriction. It's hard once per turn, and you do have to tribute a Rescue Ace after you summon one. So, you know, if you don't have a Rescue Ace monster in rotation on field or in hand, this card is not nearly as good, but there are still like some really, really good applications for this card, especially since it's a quick play. Plus, even the added benefit of getting a trap back on a later turn is huge. It makes us feel even more comfortable running one-ofs of the traps for the first set off Turbulence, because then from there you just get them back for free on later turns. It's great. Okay, so those are the new cards. They're phenomenal, right? It's an E-Telly, an awesome extender/boss monster. Awesome. Really good cards. Now let's talk about some of the implications here. We already have Hydrant. He is one of the focal points of the deck. He searches a monster. And him just being on the field does make for some of your spells and traps to gain a higher ceiling. They allow you to do more stuff like that. So that's really cool. This is a very important card for the deck for sure. One that's super, super interesting to me is Rescue Ace Impulse. This card is very, very spicy. This card says when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, quick effect, tribute this card from hand or field, hand, and if you are then special summon a machine Rescue Ace monster from your deck. Now here's one of the little whiffs I think with these new cards that could have made them monumentally better. And by monumentally better, I mean make Impulse monumentally better, and which inherently is just the deck's ability to play going second. Impulse is not a hand trap. He is a hand trap, but he doesn't interrupt your opponent. So he's not really a trap. He's just a card that like starts your engine on the opponent's turn. Unfortunately, Preventer needs another Rescue Ace monster on field to be able to use his Book of Moon effect. If he didn't, you know how crazy Impulse would have been? That just like going second, the deck inherently can just play 3 copies of Impulse, and if your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, summon a big, beefy 2800 body that can Book of Moon your opponent, going second, and then if he leaves the field, he could float into a banished Rescue Ace. Now, this guy doesn't banish himself, so, you know, he may not float right then, but gives you the potential to. That would make this card monumentally better for the deck. And I think that's one of the weaknesses of the deck. I don't think it's great going second. Which is a common weakness, especially for more roguish decks. But it's a gripe I have that like they could have taken a huge step forward into making this deck monumentally better by giving them their own Havness. Like Havness led to interruption on the opponent's turn a lot of the time. Impulse doesn't. That could have been a huge, huge step for them. Now, this definitely still leaves the door is just still open. Impulse still exists, so maybe down the line we'll get something that just maybe it's a rescue ace monster that when it's summoned pops a card, negates a card, whatever. In which case Impulse becomes really extra spicy. But until then, we're just chilling. Impulse is still a good card in the deck, but it could have been so good, and especially to help cover up one of the weaknesses the deck has had. So I just want to point that out. From there, you have Airlifter. One important thing with Airlifter, he's never had a great search target off of him. When he's normal or special, he adds a Rescue Ace spell. Now he becomes a 1-card starter for the deck. You go normal summon Airlifter, Airlifter search emergency, emergency summon. You probably summon Hydrant from deck and then tribute the Airlifter. Then you go Hydrant, search Preventer. Preventer banishes the Airlifter from grave, so that way you now have a float target. And you at least have a Book of Moon set up here, and this doesn't even include like any way to Turbulence, right? Like obviously there could have been ways, there were ways to Turbulence here if you wanted, but you could also go Preventer, because you could just link off the Hydrant for a Link Karibo or something, and then banish both of them in grave. Actually, you could actually banish the spell in grave, so you actually could do Turbulence there if you wanted, and not even lose the Hydrant, which does matter. So. 1-card play into Turbulence, essentially, so that's really nice for consistency. That's also a Fire Warrior, so not only is it roadable, but it's also Durendalable, so you kind of have 7 ways to that card if you want to max out on the search ability there. That's really nice. Definitely makes this card a lot better, for sure. Next up, you have Fire Attacker. I think these cards are interesting. Fire Attacker and Fire Engine. They both say if a Rescue Ace monster is normal or special summoned to your field, you can special summon them from the hand. They're like decent extenders. Fire Attacker also has the benefit that if your opponent ever adds a card to hand, you can draw 2 cards and discard 1. And Fire Engine, so if your opponent's if a monster is special summoned to your opponent's field, you can just special summon a level 4 lower Rescue Ace from hand, deck, or graveyard. So that's quite good. The particularly interesting thing here is I think both of these cards do become better with Impulse, because you could Impulse into Preventer if you have Impulse plus one of these guys in hand, and then either one could summon, and then they turn on Preventer. So that is one way to turn on the Book of Moon. It's not nearly as consistent because you would need another card in hand, and you'd obviously need it all to resolve. But, summoning Fire Attacker, so now you have a Book of Moon, and if your opponent adds a card to hand from that point on, you get to draw 2, discard 1, is actually quite strong. And in the same vein, being able to have the Book of Moon plus now when they special summon ever for the rest of the turn, you're going to just summon a level 4 or lower Rescue Ace, which could just be the Spell Searcher Lifter, to just get the spell. That's going to let you play even further on your opponent's turn next turn. That's really nice. There are some cool tools here. The deck can play a little bit on the opponent's turn, but it does take more particular hands. So I do think there'll be some questions on what kind of ratios we play for Fire Engine as well as Fire Attacker, but I do think they're really interesting. And the last one here is Turbulence. Turbulence obviously being the focal point of the deck, the main boss monster of the deck. I think Preventer does a really good job at supplementing Turbulence. You're going to have lines where you can end on both, and that's great. And it's also just nice to know that you have another option if Turbulence gets impermed or Veilered or something, right? He doesn't get to set all 4 of the cards he wants. You can still end on a Book of Moon. Plus, some other stuff you might, a lot, the deck can make, will make, IP somewhat often. So, IP plus Preventer and another monster so that his Book of Moon effect is live. So, Unicorn plus a Book of Moon at least, and that's through 1 or 2 hand traps, is not terrible. So, Yeah, I think the deck's in a much, much better position than it was before. I still think it can improve, but I do think it now lands on my Rogue radar, and that's all I ask from Konami. When you make a new deck, it doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to rewrite how we view Yu-Gi-Oh! and meta decks like Tearlament and Sprite did, but it just needs to be on my Rogue radar, enough that if I build it optimally, it can play with the big boys. That's all I hope for, but hopefully this gives you a little bit more insight. One more thing that's like kind of a bummer that I said that I wanted to touch on. Fire Engine could have been just a little bit better. If it could have summoned any Rescue Ace monster from deck when your opponent special summons, then like this card becomes even more insane, because then you can like special Preventer on the opponent's turn, and then Preventer then his Book of Moon effect is live because you just already have Fire Engine up on the field. But again, just a small text things, specifically Impulse. The fact that, specifically Preventer, that he needs another Rescue Ace monster on field to be a Book of Moon. That's the biggest gripe I have here, and it's a small one, because these cards are still phenomenal, but like, it was so close to just giving the deck a Book of Moon hand trap in archetype, which would have been like so cool, and it meant that like, you could do combos where you end on Impulse, so that way, like with Impulse in hand, so that way you're gonna have a way to get to Preventer on the opponent's turn if you didn't set him up already. Like, there were some really cool options there. It's not dead, it's not terrible, it's actually quite good. They're just small things, and those are maybe things that we look for down the line, next wave of support, whether it's in the next set, whether it's years from now. Hopefully they will make Impulse crazy. That's the hope. But that's it for today, guys. I just want to go a little more in depth on the Rescue Ace archetype. They clearly have flaws still. The deck actually has no negates. You can negate a monster effect on the field, and that is it. So evenly Lightning Storm decimate you. But aside from stuff like that, the deck is actually really cool, and I think it's strong enough to actually play now with the big boys. And that's the most exciting thing for me. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Let me know your thoughts down below. Anything that I didn't note here, specific interactions with the new cards and the old ones, maybe some random cards I didn't mention here that like aren't even part of the archetype that become more relevant here. That'd be interesting too. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'm Eddie for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Bruce.